like, hey, fuck you. We're not going to take direction from the Trump administration. That's more powerful than each one individually thinking that you're going to save yourself. God Save America is brought to you by